everyone, I'm Gabby. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I am telling another story time, and this one is something I went through about 20 years ago. Actually, exactly 20 years ago. And it's about the time I experienced my first earthquake. It's interesting because I live in California, which is known for having earthquakes. I mean, you know, we have the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. We have the 1989 Loma Prieta. I was not alive during either, obviously. My first earthquake, I actually was not in California at the time. I was overseas. I was in El Salvador visiting my grandmother as she lived there at the time. And my dad's side of the family is from El Salvador, so, you know, we had a lot of family there other than my grandma, and we were just, you know, visiting everyone. So I remember it was over winter break because it was, I think, the first time in a while that I'd been on a plane. I mean, I'd been on planes before, but I have more of a memory of this trip, and you know, obviously because of what happened, but my birthday falls over winter break, so I was 5 when I went, and then I turned 6 in El Salvador, which was kind of cool, and then everything happened, and yeah. So we took a plane to El Salvador, obviously, and we stayed with my grandmother. She had a house there at the time, and I remember it was really pretty and colorful, and it had a really nice garden, and you know, it was very, like, if you've been to Central America, you know, everything's very colorful and bright, and it's lovely. So we were staying with her, and we were also visiting other family members, like my uncle, my dad's brother, and he owned a yacht. We'd go in the yacht and just like go to this, like, he owned part of an island, I guess. So like we'd go there and we would have barbecues there. And so I was 5 to 6 at the time, which means my brother was 2-ish, 3-ish, like 2.5, 3. I think he was like 3. So he was really little. And I remember specifically, like, he would run around the island like butt naked. Cause I mean, you know, like, who cares? Like, no one's really, it wasn't like a public area. Like, he could do whatever he wanted. And I'll come back to why my brother running around on the island is important, but I just remember, like, he did that a lot, and it was, you know, like, it started off as a really nice trip, and it was my second time out of the country at that point, and you know, it was a very fun time, and I was enjoying seeing family and, you know, like, being immersed in the culture, and it was lovely. Then the day of the earthquake. So it started very, you know, like, just a normal day. Anytime there's an earthquake, the day's just normal. It's not like you have signs, like when there's gonna be a hurricane, like the winds pick up, or if there's gonna be a tornado, the sky turns that really ominous, like, greenish color. Like, you know, there's none of that. So I somehow forgot to mention that the day before the earthquake, we all noticed that the animals were kind of off. Like, there were a bunch of birds squawking, and I mean, you know, birds usually are chirping and squawking and like doing their thing, but we noticed there were a lot of birds just kind of freaking out the day before. I honestly have no idea how, like, my parents or my grandmother missed that, but somehow we did. And we also went to a zoo the day before, and the animals who were, you know, in cages were like, the monkeys were grabbing at the cage and like screaming, and the animals were all acting very agitated. And we thought it was because maybe the animals were being abused, because, you know, like, when it comes to zoos and stuff, sometimes they don't treat the animals the best. So we actually thought it was that the animals were freaking out because they were being abused and they were screaming for help, when in reality they could feel the waves of the incoming earthquake and were freaking out because they were stuck in cages and couldn't escape. It was just a normal day. We get up, and from what I remember, we were going to go on my uncle's yacht that day, and we were going to have a barbecue at the island. And so we stopped at a place to buy meat. I think my dad was getting like beef or something, like something to barbecue, I don't know. And so he went up, and it was gonna be a quick, like, go in and go out kind of thing. So I remember we parked the car, and we were in a parking garage. So it was one of those like cement fixtures, and we were on the first floor. We were at the ground level. And my dad went out to go to the butcher shop and pick up like what we needed for the barbecue. And so it was my dad, my mom, my grandmother, my brother, and myself. So my dad went to go get the food. And so I remember my mom was in the driver's seat. My grandmother was in the front passenger seat. I was in the back. And my brother, like, he was like a little monkey. Like, he was just crawling around everywhere, just like climbing on things. And like in El Salvador at the time, we didn't have seatbelts. So neither of us were strapped in, like we were just chilling in the car. And when my mom and grandmother obviously unbuckled their seatbelts because the front, I think, did have seatbelts. And so my brother was like going from being like next to me in the back to going to the front, and he was like playing with the car because the car was turned off, you know, so like we wouldn't crash or anything. So he was like going in and just like fiddling around with like just everything in the car, like the steering wheel and the pedals, and you know, he was just playing around, and it was safe because the car was turned off, you know, there's nothing that he could do that would put us in danger. And like he was doing that for a while, and because of that, like the car would move a little bit, because you know, like if you've been in a car and like someone has to like reach over to get something, or someone has to crawl over, like, you know, the car moves. So that was happening. But then suddenly the cars around us start moving, and we start hearing car alarms go off, and we see like lights flashing from cars, because you know, like when your alarm goes off, the lights go off too. And we, like at first we just noticed our car started moving a lot more, and like my mom or my grandma, they were just like, Ale, like stop messing with the car, like, you know, you're being a little too much right now, like you need to calm down. And my brother's just like, that wasn't me, like that wasn't me. And they're just like, Ale, like knock it off. And then that's when we noticed like the other cars around us. And I was at the time, like I had 3 little scrunchies on my wrist that had like little animals on them, and I also had like this little toy dog. And I also had one of those watches that has like the things you press and like the hoops, like you'd have like the hoops fall onto like the things, like I'll insert a picture of that now. Like I was playing with one of those along with like the little toy dog and the little scrunchies on my wrist. And I noticed something's wrong because my mom and my grandmother's tone of voice changes from like, Ale, knock it off, to wait, something's wrong. And they start looking around, and they notice the cars doing the things. And I also noticed because I could see the lights flashing, and I'm just like, this is weird, what's going on? And then I look at my mom and my grandma who are in the front, and they both look at each other, and like in unison they say terremoto, which in Spanish means earthquake. And I'm sitting there like, what? Like Mr. Krabs, like the world is spinning meme. Like I'd learned about earthquakes in school, so like I knew what an earthquake was, but I didn't realize like it was happening at that point. So at that point, like everything happened really, really fast. I remember my mom jumped out of the driver's seat and she grabbed me by my arm, and I just went flying out of the car. Like I was just like, oh, okay. And we start running towards the entrance of the parking garage because there's a freaking earthquake happening, and the structure could collapse and bury us in there. Because at this point, my mom and my grandma realized this was a big earthquake. It wasn't just like a little shake and roll. Like, you know, here the other day, like I live in the East Bay in California now, we had a 4.5 down in like Watsonville, Santa Cruz area, and we felt it all the way up here in the East Bay and even up in San Francisco. And it just felt like a little like some things were shaking, and then that was it. But no, like this was like, we felt our bodies going like this. And like while I was running, I felt all weird because like the ground felt all uneven, and I was like 6, so my mom, who was like an adult, was just like running, and I'm like with my little legs trying to keep up, and I'm just like, ah, what's going on? Like I was just confused and scared at that point because I could see my mom was scared. And you know, like when your mom is scared, something's wrong. So I'm just like, ah. And behind us, my grandmother had grabbed my brother, and he was like clinging to her because he was scared too at that point. And my grandmother, she's really short. She's like 5 feet 5'1". So like my brother was a lot for her, but she was still running with him because we knew we had to get out of the parking structure. And also, like, side note, my mom is from Chile, which is one of the worst earthquake countries in the world. Like, I would say Chile, Japan, and Turkey have like the worst earthquakes. I know Chile for sure has the worst earthquakes because they had the 1960 earthquake. I'll insert like a little screenshot here. But my mom lived through that. I mean, she was like an infant when it happened, but you know, like my mom knows earthquakes. And El Salvador has a lot of earthquakes too because they have a lot of volcanoes in the country. So my grandma knew too. So we all knew we had to get out because otherwise the parking structure could collapse on us and we'd all die. So we're running and finally like we make it out of the structure and we're standing on the sidewalk and it felt like the ground had tilted like this. Like it felt like everything was to the side and you could just see people running frantically and people screaming, and I'm just like holding on to my mom just like, what is going on? And like the ground is obviously like moving under us, so I'm just like like it was not a fun time. And just like seeing people running and screaming, it was just like, this happened 20 years ago and I can still remember it very vividly. It was not fun. Then finally the shaking stops and like we're all together at this point. Well, my dad, actually, we don't know where my dad is. So, and remember, well, actually I didn't even tell you what time, like what year this happened. This was January of 2001. So we didn't have cell phones. No, we did, but they obviously weren't smartphones. Like we couldn't just like go on Find My iPhone and like see where my dad was. So we're just like, crap, where is he? And we're trying to figure out like where he is and what's going on. And my grandma and my mom were like, should one of us go look for him? And then the other one of us like stays with the kids, like what should we do? And then my dad comes running out and, you know, thank goodness he was okay because he had actually, so from what my dad told me, when the earthquake started, he was in the shop, like he was about to pay, and everyone was like, we gotta get out, like we gotta go, there's an earthquake. And my dad was like, oh my god, my family's in the parking garage, I have to go down there. And they're like, no, like you can't go down there. And my dad's like, I have to go get my family. So like my dad ran to the parking garage to find that we weren't there because we'd already run outside. So he then went back and found us on the sidewalk, just like, and at this point the shaking had stopped. So I don't really remember like much after that. I just remember we didn't go on the yacht that day because tsunamis. So we didn't, like I'm pretty sure my family like called the rest of our family to make sure they were okay. And then we headed back to my grandmother's house. And when we got there, like the most vivid thing I remember is that she had a jar of honey in a glass jar and it had fallen from the counter and it had smashed all over and there was just honey everywhere. It was a sticky mess and there were ants everywhere because they were like, hey, free food. So we came home to like the ground covered in honey and ants, which was great. So we cleaned that up. And then I remember like we checked the house to make sure like it was safe to be in it, you know, that the foundation hadn't been compromised. And I remember there were cracks in the walls. Like there were cracks, like you could see like just hairline cracks like in the walls, but the house was safe to be in. It wasn't like it was gonna collapse at any moment. So we decided, okay, and by we, like obviously my grandmother was gonna stay because she had her house and was gonna stay. But my dad and my mom were like, we need to get home to the States because we don't know how bad, like we don't know if there's gonna be aftershocks. Because the thing is, when there's a huge earthquake like that, actually let me have the info pulled up on the phone. So the January 2001 El Salvador earthquake, it struck El Salvador on January 13th, 2001 at 1733 UTC. It was a 7.6, but then they later estimated it to be a 7.7 or a 7.9. And at the time, like when we were hearing the news, they said it was a 7.7. It struck with the epicenter 60 miles or 100 kilometers southwest of San Miguel, El Salvador, which actually I have family there, so they felt it really hard. And it was a depth of 60 kilometers. At least 944 people were killed, 5,565 injured, 108,261 houses destroyed, with another 169,692 houses damaged, and more than 150,000 buildings were damaged in El Salvador. It was bad. It was really bad. We were lucky that the house wasn't destroyed or badly damaged. I mean, I would say it was it was more than mild, it was about moderate damage. And you know, there were some like heirlooms that fell, and there were some things that were made of ceramic that fell and broke. But I mean, the most important thing was we were safe. The rest of our family was safe. The neighborhood, like we checked on the neighbors, and you know, everyone was doing okay. Now, I remember that night was when the aftershocks started. So from what I remember, we were sleeping like in our beds, and everyone was on alert, like high alert, because you know, like my parents and my grandma, they knew that after an earthquake this big, there were going to be aftershocks, and they weren't going to be like little rumbles. Like they could be as big or bigger than the earthquake that had just happened. So they were like, okay, like we're gonna sleep, but like no one's gonna sleep deeply tonight. Like we gotta be on the lookout. So I think it was my dad slept like by the doorway, like the front door, and the rest of us were like in the rooms, in the bedrooms. And then the aftershock started. So from what I remember, like the ground started shaking again, and it was shaking so hard that it woke me up, and I'm a pretty deep sleeper, so it was pretty intense for it to wake me up. And I remember my mom being like, Gabby, put on your shoes, we gotta go. And I'm like, ah. So I put on my shoes and we run outside, because again, we didn't know if this could cause the house to cave in. So my mom, my grandma, my brother, my dad and I, we all get outside, and we're just basically standing like in the front yard, and we see like all the neighbors coming out, and we're all just looking at each other like, is everyone okay? Does anyone need anything? Like, you know, are we all good? And there were several aftershocks that night, so none of us slept in our beds. Like I'm pretty sure I slept on the couch, and we had to run outside like at least 3 or 4 times that night. It was not fun. And what was kind of funny was my brother slept through a lot of these aftershocks, but again, he was 3. So, you know, he doesn't have a very vivid memory of this, well, like I do, because, you know, I was 6. Then a few days later, it was the same thing. There were like multiple aftershocks throughout the day. Actually, I can see more than 2,500 aftershocks hit. So some of them were very big and we felt them, and others were like little things that we didn't feel, but that's a lot of freaking aftershocks. And, you know, after the earthquake happened, we just stayed at my grandmother's house until we could get a flight home. And the severity of the earthquake, like it didn't really hit me until the next day, like after the earthquake. So, you know, we would get the newspaper put on the porch every day. And the thing about like countries other than the United States is that in the United States, like gore and like graphic images are very censored. You know, like when you hear the news and they're like, the video we're about to show you is deeply disturbing, you know, viewer discretion is advised. Or like they censor bloody images. Like even if you go on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter today, like they will censor the video, and you have to click if you actually want to see it, if there's any like blood or broken bones or any of that involved. That's not a thing in El Salvador. Gosh, this scarred me for a long time. So the next morning we get the newspaper, and I decided to like go out and grab it. And on the front page, there's a big picture, like the front page picture. And also, if you don't like graphic images or like any of that, just skip ahead because this is not pleasant. It was a picture of a man. He was covered in blood. He was dead. And there was debris like on top of him, but you could see like his torso and his face, and you could see that like he was all mutilated and there was blood everywhere. And me being a 6-year-old who had never seen any of that, because my parents were very good at like not letting me see those kinds of things so that I wouldn't be, you know, scarred, that really impacted me. I remember like I screamed, and my mom or my dad, one of the two, like came out and they were just like, oh, don't look at that. And they just like took the newspaper and were like, oh, we forgot. So they just like took it away, and like they wouldn't let me or my brother look at it. And I just remember being like, like it was not pretty. And then after that, like in the news, they would just show like, they didn't hold back. They were showing dead bodies, they were showing injured people, they were showing really, really awful images. And as a kid, it was not pleasant to see that. And Ugh, that was hard. I have to say though, the image that stuck with me the most, so obviously the man covered in debris, that was pretty hard. There was another picture I so happened to see like in that same newspaper, and it was of a guy and like the house had basically fallen on him. So you could see like his body had basically been split in half. Like that was not fun to see. And you know, just thinking back also, it's so sad how many people died in this quake. It was really bad. But I have to say, the picture that has stuck with me the most throughout these years, because like my brain kind of censored the really graphic images, was this picture of a landslide that happened in one of the towns, and I'll insert a picture here. It's mentioned in the Wikipedia article, which I'm gonna link below, but there was a landslide that happened. They happened in Santa Tecla and Comasagua. I don't remember which of the two towns we were in the day before, but we were in one of those towns. The landslide that happened, like the picture you just saw, we could have been buried in that if we'd been in that town the day after, which is really harrowing to think about. We were literally there the day before, and the next day like a huge part of the town was wiped out by the landslide caused by the earthquake. I mean, it's like to this day I'm just like, whoa, we narrowly escaped death. Another thing, so at the beginning I mentioned that my brother would run around the island, like because we'd be on the beach and he'd be running around just like butt naked, just like not a care in the world, being a carefree child. And after the earthquake happened, the sand on the beaches of these islands and also like along the coast of El Salvador became quicksand. Say we'd gone even earlier to pick up the food and then gotten on the yacht and gotten to the island. If we had been on the island at the time of the earthquake, my brother could have gotten like sucked in by the quicksand, because he would just run around unattended, because you know, like we knew we were the only ones like on that part of the island, and we felt very safe. Like we didn't feel like, my parents didn't feel like they had to be watching us like every 2 seconds. So if we'd been on that island when the earthquake happened, it could have ended really like a lot worse than what we dealt with. So it's one of those like we were in the right place at the right time kind of thing, even though not so great that we were, you know, in a parking garage. But it's just, we could have been in that town when the landslide happened, we could have been on the island, we could have been on the road, maybe even gotten into a car accident, you know, you don't know. So it's a lot of what ifs, but you know, what happened happened, and I'm just grateful that my family was okay. Now, we were finally able to get a flight back home to fly into SFO. We gotta go, you know, like the kids are scared. And also winter break was ending, so like, you know, we wouldn't have been able to stay longer really anyways, because we had to go back to, well, I had to go back to first grade, and my brother, I think he was in preschool at the time. Yeah. So, you know, we had to go home anyways, but my parents wanted to go home sooner so that we could, you know, have some time to recover from this very traumatic event. So we got a flight home, and I like vaguely remember this, like bits and pieces, but we were walking through the airport, the San Salvador airport, which is the main airport in the country, and the airport sustained a lot of damage, which I think is why we couldn't get a flight sooner, because they had to clear things, and obviously they had to clear the runways and make sure like everything was still working and none of the planes were damaged and all of that. So I remember we walked through, and this was before 9/11, so this was January of 2001. So the whole like TSA security, like that wasn't really a thing, which is so weird to think about now because I fly so much now. I'm just used to having to go through security and take my shoes off and take everything out of my bag, but we didn't have to do any of that because this was pre 9/11. We just went through. My grandma came with us and like walked us all the way to our gate, and you could just see like there were piles of debris everywhere that, you know, like the airport employees had like tried to clean up and just clear so people could walk through. The airport was very empty. There weren't a lot of people flying, obviously. It was mostly just like people who'd been visiting who were trying to get home. And my dad, I remember, or was it my mom, one of the two mentioned that there was a store in the airport that sold perfumes. And in the earthquake, all the perfumes had fallen, and you know, perfumes are in glass bottles most of the time, so they'd all shattered, and it was just all this perfume just all over the ground. And I don't really remember this, but my dad and my mom were like, oh, it smelled so bad. Because imagine just like hundreds of perfumes just splattered everywhere, and oh, it must have smelled so bad. I'm so glad I don't remember that, because I remember my dad had like a minor allergic reaction to that because the really strong scents and everything. But you know, we got on the plane, we got home, and you know, we watched the news. It made international news, so they were definitely talking about it in the States. And I remember, well, I don't really remember, but I was told that, you know, like we had family who lived in the States and also in other countries, like, you know, checking up on us, being like, hey, we heard there was this huge earthquake, are you guys okay? And you know, thank goodness we were fine. You know, my grandmother's house sustained some damage, but you know, no one in our family was injured, you know, no one died. But it was still very intense, and quite an interesting way to end my second trip out of the country. And definitely one of the most vivid memories I have of my childhood. So the earthquake was so big that, oh, also the big aftershock that we had after the earthquake was a 5.7, which is significant. And that was on January 15th, so 2 days after the earthquake itself. It said that, so the initial earthquake was felt from Mexico City to Colombia. That's a lot of distance. That's really freaking far. That's basically like Mexico, all of Central America, like all the way into like northern South America. That's a huge distance, and that just tells you the power of this earthquake. Like, that's how far it was felt. That's intense. I mean, just as an example, like this earthquake, or this, I wouldn't even call it an earthquake, this baby quake we experienced a few days ago here that was near Santa Cruz was a 4.5, and it was felt all the way up in San Francisco, which is like 60 miles away. So if a 4.5 was felt like 60 miles away, imagine a 7.7. Earthquakes are they're serious business. They're not, oh my gosh, like, don't take earthquakes lightly. Also, clean water and sanitation was very badly impacted. I'm pretty sure we still had clean water. Like, it was, I mean, people were really badly impacted. Something my mom told me recently, actually, because I was, you know, asking her about the earthquake because I was gonna make the story time. I was asking my mom what she remembered and anything I'd missed, because, you know, I don't have a perfect memory of it considering I was a young child. And she told me that actually she had brought like a lot of stuff for my brother and I. Like, my mom is one of those moms who has extra of everything. Like, she has an extra set of clothes in her car, like for everyone. She carries blankets. She always has a first aid kit. She always has like Advil and Tylenol and allergy pills and like anything you could possibly need, you know, like alcohol wipes, everything. And because I was 6 at the time, I didn't need too much, but my brother, who was 3, you know, he needed his pacifier, he needed his toys, like he needed, you know, like she basically still carried like a diaper bag around, basically. Obviously not with diapers, because my brother was, I'm pretty sure he was potty trained at that point. She was still carrying a lot of stuff around for him, and she brought a lot of extra stuff. And she ended up giving most of it away to families in El Salvador who had in fact lost their homes and lost, you know, things that they needed for their young children. So I remember my mom telling me that, you know, she gave away a lot of my brother's things because, you know, we had the money to buy more, like it was fine, but these families had nothing. But I remember seeing that, you know, people really came together to help each other, and, you know, it was nice to see that. But it was really scary to experience the earthquake, and being so young too, it being my first big earthquake. I've never experienced an earthquake as big as that one. We had, let's see, I was living in San Jose, and in 2007 we had, I think, like a 5 point something hit us because we lived right by the Alum Rock Fault. Like, literally our house was like right under it. And I remember that one was pretty scary, and a lot of people felt that one. But again, there was pretty much no damage. Like, it was nothing like this. Like, there were no landslides. Basically, nothing was destroyed. Like, it was nothing like this. And I've never experienced an earthquake like that since. And I hope I never do. But I am surrounded by the San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault, the Calaveras Fault, and a few more, because, you know, here in the Bay Area we are surrounded by fault lines, so it is inevitable that at some point there will be a big one. From what I've researched, the San Andreas Fault is only capable of like an 8.2, which is still intense. I mean, that's a big earthquake, but it's nothing like movies, when like the San Andreas movie that came out where they made it like a 9.5. Like, no, it's not capable of doing that, at least not in San Francisco. I don't know about the San Andreas down in Southern California. Maybe it could create an earthquake that big, but at least here in the Bay Area, the San Andreas can only do an 8.2. The Hayward Fault is very overdue for a big quake. It's like 30 years overdue. So I'm just sitting here like, you know, just living in earthquake country and growing up in earthquake country and having family on both sides. Again, my dad is from El Salvador, so they're used to earthquakes. And then my mom's side of the family is from Chile, so they are also very used to earthquakes. So we all know what to do. We're all prepared. We have like our emergency packs. We always keep our cars at half a tank or more, because when there's an earthquake, you can't get gas. So if you don't have gas in your car and you have to evacuate, you're walking. We're prepared, we're waiting. It'll happen someday, but again, you know, technology isn't to the point where we can be like, oh, there's gonna be an earthquake in 2 weeks, you guys have to prepare. Like, no, we're not there yet. That is my story time on the first earthquake I ever experienced at the age of 6 in a foreign country that I had never been to before. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a like, as that will help me a lot. And if you have ever experienced an earthquake, let me know. Comment below. You know, what have you gone through? If you are from like Japan or Chile or the Philippines, or, you know, here in the States, if you're in Alaska, let me know if you've ever been through an earthquake, because if you live on the Ring of Fire, you've probably experienced one. Even if you didn't feel it, because there's a lot of little earthquakes too. Thank you so much for watching this video. Other than story times, I do post a lot about my music. Got my piano behind me. I also post vlogs every once in a while and other things that I feel like posting. But if you subscribe, you'll be the first to know when a new video is out, and you can join this lovely community of people who support me and my kind of interesting life. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!